So in 2024, Democrats are going to be put on defense in a lot of Senate races around the country. Places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona are all states that Republicans are going to be heavily contesting. But one of the few states that's expected to be somewhat competitive that Republicans are defending is the state of Texas. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the potential matchup between incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz and his likely Democratic opponent, Colin Allred. So we're going to take a look at this race. We're going to take a look at Texas politics as a whole and sort of analyze where this race is going to shape up a year and a half out, which is certainly a bold thing to do. But given the nature of Texas politics, we sort of have an indication of how this race is going to go and ultimately how I think the top of the ballot could potentially impact this race. So we're going to get into all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Texas is a state that historically has been very conservative. Really since the 1980s, it's been reliably Republican on the presidential level. It hasn't voted for a Democrat since Jimmy Carter in 1976. In 2024, it's likely that that trajectory is going to continue, although Texas continues to get ever more Democratic with each passing presidential cycle. But we also have a coinciding Senate race, which will be very important for Republicans to hold if they want to recapture the Senate in 2024. So of course, looking at this race so far on the Republican side, we've got Ted Cruz. We've got a couple of other primary challengers. You've got a former mayor of Corpus Christi, some farmer, Dan Crenshaw, who was a current congressman from the 2nd District. He's declined to run against Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is going to have the nomination if he wants it. He's the incumbent. This isn't really going to be contested. On the Democratic side, you've got a couple of names. Only one name really stands out, and that, of course, is Colin Allred. If you've been paying attention to politics for some time now, it's been widely speculated that he was going to jump in this race, really ever since he flipped that congressional district in the Dallas-Fort Worth area back in 2018, I believe, and became a congressman there. And really ever since, a lot of people thought after 2020 he was going to run for Senate. Some people also expected Beto potentially would try a rematch with Ted Cruz, but I think given his past disappointing electoral performances in Texas, especially as recently as just last November, I don't really think Texas Democrats are going to nominate Beto again, and if they are, it's a very unwise decision since it's very clear the state of Texas really wants nothing to do with the guy. But Colin Allred is arguably a stronger candidate, although he does have some baggage as well. He recently made some comments essentially advocating that the Second Amendment needs to be rewritten. And certainly that's not going to play well in a very gun-friendly state like Texas, which even though it's a heavily suburban state, still is very much in favor of the Second Amendment, guns. That's one of the reasons why Democrats try to tread very carefully on that. Notably, Beto O'Rourke after 2020 didn't do that, and that certainly could be attributed to his poor performance there last November. So looking at this race so far, the ratings are very interesting. So Inside Elections has us a solid R. I don't really know how they base their rankings on. Maybe it's likelihood instead of margin. That's usually how these are. And you've got likely Republican ratings from the Cook Political Report and Sabato's Crystal Ball. We've got no preliminary polling on this race, although I really don't think polling is that effective in races, especially this early on. And really when you take a look at the midterms as a whole last year, polling really failed. All the pundits really got the midterms wrong. I don't think anybody would have told you that New York State would have been within 8 points, but then you would have had Pennsylvania go to the Democrats by 15. Republicans barely capture the House. Democrats win the Senate. So it was really a very unpredictable midterm. And the reason I bring that up is because 2024 could also be very unpredictable. We still have a year and a half away, even though we think we know what's going to happen this early on, just given the nature of politics in Texas. Things could very much change from now until then. But if we take a look back at Texas last year, Texas certainly trended to the right from where it was in 2020, which was sort of a reassuring sign for Republicans. Greg Abbott won his race for governor by just around 11 points. Beto O'Rourke got less than 44% of the vote in the state by comparison. His last performance back in 2018, he was at about 48.3. He was the closest Democrat to winning statewide in Texas since the 1990s. So it really was a monumental moral victory for Democrats, even though they didn't end up winning the state. It showed them that Texas could potentially be in play under the right circumstances. And that's really because you've had a lot of the urban and suburban areas, the Dallas-Fort Worth metro, Austin, Houston, all of these areas are heavily populated and trending left pretty rapidly. Again, if we take a look at 2020, for instance, and compare it to 2012, just 8 years earlier, it's really a night and day comparison. Harris County, which is the most populous county in Texas, went to Barack Obama by 0.1%. It was essentially tied. Fast forward to 2020, and the Democrats won that county by almost 14 points. So you really have a huge shift in population centers. Austin in particular is another one, shifting almost 7 points to the left. But Dallas-Fort Worth has the most dramatic shifts, specifically Collin and Denton counties, which are the suburbs outside of Dallas and Fort Worth. And honestly, you could argue that even Fort Worth is a very suburban county. But these areas continually trending left has been the biggest problem for Republicans in the state of Texas. And one of the reasons why Texas has narrowed up so much in recent years. I mean, you take a look at places like Collin and Denton County just 8 years ago, there's just been a massive demographic change in these counties, a change in voting patterns. I mean, you have these counties voting for Mitt Romney by around 33 points in 2012, and then in 2020 only voting for Donald Trump by single digits. In the case of Collin County, only about 4 points. So, you know, a lot of Democrats and political analysts think that these counties are probably on the verge of flipping and could flip as soon as 2024. So that's really just the overview of what's happening in Texas. This is becoming much more friendly territory for Democrats overall. And one of the things that Republicans have always had a big advantage on in Texas was not even their strength in urban areas, it was their strength in suburban and especially ex-urban areas. I mean, just take a look at some of these rural counties. Republicans are winning them by 70, 80 points. And these counties, some of which don't really have a lot of people, but some of these counties are fairly populated. Tom Green County, you have some population centers, Lubbock, areas where there are large populations of Republican voters that, I mean, Randall County is a county where Republicans are almost getting 80% of the vote, and this county has probably around 150,000 people. So you have strong ex-urban and suburban areas for Republicans still in Texas. I mean, even though Collin and Denton counties have swung pretty far to the left, they're still redder than your average suburban county nowadays. But these trends could always change. Now, Ted Cruz is somebody who I think is going to have more difficulty than your average Republican winning in these sorts of areas. I mean, we could just compare, for instance, Donald Trump's performance in Dallas-Fort Worth, Travis County, and Houston to somebody like John Cornyn, who was also on the ballot. Now, while Donald Trump only won Texas by around 5.6%, John Cornyn won the state of Texas by almost 10 points. So he almost doubled Trump's margins between the presidential and the Senate map. But if you just take a look at Denton, you've got safe Republican margins in Denton County, likely Republican margins in Collin. Obviously, you got Fort Worth going to Cornyn by about 5. And of course, places like Dallas getting closer. Travis County under 70 points for the Democrats. That's where Republicans want to be in the state. And then, of course, Houston, MJ Hagar only winning by around 9 points in Harris County. So Cornyn is a much better fit for the state than somebody like Donald Trump, and especially somebody like Ted Cruz. I mean, these margins in Texas, these counties, has really never been seen before, probably since the 1930s in some of these counties. Travis County, Beto almost getting 75% of the vote. Fort Worth winning Fort Worth. This is the first time Fort Worth's been blue, probably since the 1990s again, possibly earlier. Dallas getting 66% of the vote. Harris County getting 58%. So Beto crushed it in all of these suburban counties. And Cruz is naturally going to have a weakness in these suburban counties, especially if the Republican at the top of the ballot also performs weak in suburban counties, i.e. Donald Trump, who in 2020 did historically bad in the Texas suburbs. And again, you could argue he still won the state of Texas because of the just sheer redness of the rural and ex-urban areas and massive shifts in the Rio Grande Valley. But the Rio Grande Valley is not very populated compared to the rest of the state. And if Republicans want long-term stability in Texas, they have to make inroads again in Fort Worth, in places like Harris County. They need to at least get it a lot closer. And of course, exurbs, places like Williamson, Bell County. Now, these areas in particular are in the Austin metro. It's not nearly as populated as the Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Harris County area. but it's certainly an area you certainly want closer margins for Republicans, and that's certainly something Ted Cruz wants if he's going to do well. Now, obviously, for Colin Allred to win, he's going to need pretty historic margins in the Texas urban areas, probably even more so than in 2018. He's probably going to have to get around 70% in Dallas County, win Tarrant County by a lean or even likely margin, get over 60% in Bexar County, definitely over 75% in Travis, and probably crack 60% in Harris. I don't think he's going to get those numbers. And if I had to bet on the outcome of the Texas Senate race today, I'd obviously go with Ted Cruz. I think this is probably lean Republican at this rate. And the only reason I say that is because Ted Cruz is a uniquely weak candidate. He's more unpopular than John Cornyn. I mean, he almost lost in 2018. I mean, granted, this was a blue wave year, but he shared the ticket with Greg Abbott, which really should have lifted him up. But honestly, Greg Abbott really didn't have any coattails on Ted Cruz whatsoever. Most voters viewed this race very different than others, and Ted Cruz's bad performance hurt a lot of other Republicans, Dan Patrick, Ken Paxton, etc., down ballot. In 2022, with Ted Cruz not on the ballot and Abbott on the ballot, and again, sort of a red wave in Texas that we really didn't see in a lot of other states, except maybe some blue states, you saw the opposite effect as in 2018. Greg Abbott actually did have positive coattails, and he was able to bring up Paxton, Patrick, Miller. These were candidates that were sort of in trouble. Paxton and Patrick in particular had their own scandals and controversies, and they did very poorly in 2018. I mean, they did better than Cruz, but they still came really close, dangerously close for them, to actually losing in a state that really shouldn't be all that competitive. So in 2024, Ted Cruz, if he wants to have a strong performance in the state, needs somebody at the top of the ticket who's going to have a positive effect in Texas. Now, Biden is not popular in the state of Texas. I don't think he's going to win the state of Texas in 2024, but it's very possible that you could still see these suburban shifts continue in Texas, regardless of who the Republican nominee is, because these places are changing so rapidly demographically. They're getting more educated, they're getting more diverse, and that means better territory for Democrats. That's just how politics is. So Republicans have to make significant inroads, specifically with Latinos and college-educated white voters, and those are two demographics that Ted Cruz has shown to be pretty poor with, especially by Texas standards. I mean, one of Cruz's worst performing areas in the state was the Rio Grande Valley, and now obviously we don't know what it's going to be like in 2024. Again, it very well could reflect Trump's margins in 2020 and get much redder, but again, you still have the problem of urban and suburban Texas. Now, I still maintain the lean Republican rating. Obviously, I think that's subject to change. If polling does become very favorable to Cruz and the environment nationally looks good for Republicans, I certainly think it could be a likely margin. If Republicans are winning the presidency in 2024, I think they're going to have a pretty strong showing in Texas. I don't think it's going to be a double-digit showing on the presidential ballot, but it could be a slight overperformance of what you saw potentially in 2020. Again, all depends on the nominee, all depends on what happens with the economy and Joe Biden. But as of right now, I think Republicans can count on the state of Texas, although they certainly can't ignore it because this state isn't what it was in 2012. I mean, 2012 was Ted Cruz's first election in the state of Texas for federal office, and he won by 16 points over his Democratic opponent, getting, absolutely crushing margins in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, winning Harris County, something Romney didn't even do, and getting under 60%, at least for the Democrat in Travis County. These are things you're probably not going to see in Texas politics for a very long time, but Ted Cruz was able to accomplish it. Solely because really Texas was just a much different state back then. You had a lot less voters, much more conservative voters. In the past 11 years, Texas has demographically changed a great deal and has certainly gotten a lot more democratic than it was at the time. So I think this is certainly a Republican-leaning race. I think Republicans can probably count on this seat, but again, they really can't ignore it because Colin Allred's going to get a lot of funding from national Democrats, even if at the end of the day he doesn't end up winning the state. And Texas isn't one of those states like Kentucky or South Carolina that Republicans can just basically ignore and count on the Republicans to win and let the Democrats funnel their money into it, because Texas is a state that is getting a lot closer. But of course, if I had to bet, I think Ted Cruz and whoever the Republican nominee for president is will still win Texas. But it might be a bit closer than what we saw back in 2020. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.